Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Title Now pop-up webinar series. I'm Melissa Murphy with the fund, and I have the pleasure to host these webinars, at which we try to cover topics that are timely and are of interest to the real estate transaction industry. So if you have any suggestions for topics, reach out to me and let me know what you would like to hear about. You can email me, you can call me, email's easy. mmurphy@thefund.com. And a reminder that we also push the audio version of these webinars out on our podcast, which is also conveniently called Title Now. This is a great way for you to listen to the content again, which I'm sure you will want to do over and over again, but also share it with your colleagues. And it's super easy to subscribe to the podcast. You can get it through whatever channel or source you get your other podcasts from. So please subscribe today. I would love for you to be one of my regular listeners. Today's topic is very timely, definitely falls into that category. Geographic targeting orders have been with us for 7 years now in Florida. But the coverage was originally limited to just 3 counties, Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, and Broward. And the GTOs kept getting extended. And so we got into the habit of anticipating each of those extensions. So we weren't ever surprised when we got the extension 1 or 2 days before the deadline would have expired. And fund members doing business in those 3 counties have figured it out. They have incorporated the required analysis and filing into their workflow. It's pretty much business as usual for those folks. But with the most recent GTO extension, we were a bit taken aback. Not a lot, but a bit, because the GTO was expanded to cover 8 more counties in Florida. There's long been talk in Washington about the desire of FinCEN to expand these nationwide, which is why we weren't too surprised that it got expanded in Florida. And I guess to some degree we should be grateful. It's only 8 more counties and not more. But this does affect a whole lot of fund members. And those of you in those 8 counties probably tuned out of our webinars and information about all the procedures and information that we produced to support members that must deal with the requirements of the GTO. But of course, we always want you to be prepared for whatever challenge comes your way. So today's webinar is all about FinCEN GTO compliance for those of you who are fairly new to this topic. So who better to have with me but Jay St. Lawrence, our regulatory compliance counsel. And Jay's here to fill you in on what you need to do. So Jay, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Melissa.
Oh, I know it is. So first, before Jay shares all of his knowledge with you, let's do some housekeeping things. We do encourage your questions. And put those in the questions area. It's on the right-hand side of your page there. We will do our best to answer the questions at the end of our presentation or our conversation. And if we can't get to your question because we run out of time, I am respectful of your time, then we will try to reach out to you individually with an answer. And we have with us monitoring those questions one of our underwriting attorneys, Princey Valiatho-Daddle, who is an expert next to Jay on this topic, so she will be very helpful. Let's get started with some basics, Jay. So what resources does the fund already have available that can help members with compliance?
So besides the information on the info center on the fund website, which has links to the new GTO and other information and bulletins from Melissa in the past, the guts of this thing is providing this mandatory report, right? You got to do the currency transaction report. And I think that's the part, I think lawyers can wrap their brains around what we're doing here pretty well. We are, reporting the 25% or more ultimate beneficial owners of these business entities doing these cash purchases. We have a couple of videos for you, and they are in the on-demand training library section of the fund website. One is called the BSA e-filing account setup, because you file these things online. So you got to set up an account with the banking. It's BSA is the Banking Secrecy Act, and that's what all of this sort of relates to. So we have an entire video on how to set up your account. And then we have another video on how to complete a currency transaction report, and it's called How to Complete a Currency Transaction Report. And those are both in the same area of the fund website. And again, it's not the on-demand webinars. Don't go there. You won't find it. It's the on-demand training library. That's still under legal education on the fund website.
And let me say this, Jay, that putting on my hat as a member, I went on the fund's website. I clicked on the information link at the top. I went to the education section, clicked on that, and boom, those two webinars popped up right away. So it is really easy to find on the website.
Good to know.
Existing resources are there. They're very helpful. But let's go ahead and cover some of that stuff today in this webinar, so people will be able to absorb some of that information and know what they're kind of looking for when they go to those webinars. So give us a really high-level summary of the factors that a member must look at to determine whether a transaction must be reported. Before we even get to what is it that you have to report, what are the indicators in a transaction that it's going to be covered and require reporting?
Well, I mean, you want to look right at the GTO, which is fairly, readable, especially to attorneys. I don't think any, lawyers will find it too challenging, although the wrinkles can be tricky. So you are looking at a purchase of residential property. The GTO says primarily designed for residential use. So it doesn't matter how many units or what size, it's residential property. It's by a business entity, and that could be basically any kind of business entity, although somewhere along the line we got a clarification that does not include trusts, but other types, corps, LLCs, partnerships, buying residential property in one of these locations. There is a purchase dollar threshold, which is $300,000 now. If you were only paying attention back at the beginning, it used to be much higher, but now with the $300,000 threshold, it's probably going to cover virtually any residential transaction you can think of. It has to be made without an institutional loan, and conceptually, it might be helpful. I don't want to throw too many curves or anything, but it might be helpful to think about what's being done here. Is the government wants to be able to identify people who are making these purchases for anti-money laundering purposes. So they figure if you're using an institutional lender, they're already subject to the Banking Secrecy Act, and there's a certain rubric that they go through for people who are doing business with them. So one of the things that brings you under the GTO requirement is not having an institutional loan. If you have one of those, you're out from under this thing. And also, an additional requirement, which I guess corresponds to that, is that you're using a form of payment like a bank draft, cash, cashier's check, something like that. And we don't discuss it a lot, but another requirement, the reason why we're all involved, is that title insurance is being issued. So, well,
that's a point that I think is important, because to whom are these GTOs directed? The underwriters.
The underwriters. They have co-opted our industry, and again, I'm not making a judgment or editorializing, but the Treasury Department is behind FinCEN. FinCEN is a financial crimes enforcement network. It's a division of Treasury, which is part of the federal government, of course. And what they have decided is they have co-opted title insurance underwriters and their agents to be responsible for doing this reporting. I guess the obvious logic would be we're going to be involved in most of these transactions, so we are in a position to see when a business entity of unknown beneficial owners is purchasing residential property in one of these areas. for $300,000 or more. Therefore, they have touched us and said it is your job to do this.
So you've already mentioned this, but I want to emphasize it, that there is an obligation to file a form, and you mentioned the name of the form.
The Currency Transaction Report, or CTR, since we love letters.
Currency Transaction Report, CTR, yet another sort of acronym that we can throw around. But is that all done online now?
Yes. Yeah, that's how this is not a paper process. And this is another trend for all kinds of government reporting when we get into the Corporate Transparency Act next year and so forth. You have to go online, set up an account, and submit electronically. That's the only way they want it.
So if a member has questions about whether their transaction is covered based on the parameters that you outlined, or getting the online account and filling out that CTR, is there a place here at the fund that they can easily send questions?
Yeah, you can contact us. I believe, Melissa, that there's still an email address, right? For
regulatory compliance at thefund.com.
Okay. Just me. Yeah, that'll go to me. Yeah, regulatory compliance at thefund.com, all written out. You can also, if you have substantive legal questions, definitely contact us or call me or talk to Princey. If you have substantive legal questions on how it works, if you are caught up in, I'm in the middle of the form and I'm stuck on, checkbox 36A, I would recommend you call the fund and ask for the paralegals are experts in this area as well. If you're stuck on the form itself and the nitty gritty of that, they gave me a phone number, 800-432-9594, familiar, and option 9. So it's option 9. Yeah, it's option 9 on the fund directory to get to a paralegal who would be trained on the use of the forms themselves. And I don't mind trying to answer those questions either, but they're going to be better because they deal with it all the time on the nitty gritty of answering the forms. If you have questions about how this works, whether it applies, that's more regulatory compliance.
I give them that phone number again.
Yeah, and I could probably drop it in the chat. Here we go. Let me drop it in the questions box here, and maybe that will be helpful to people.
That's why Jay's here.
Yeah, here we go.
What are some typical questions that you get from members that you've experienced so far?
That I've gotten? Well, we were just chatting about one. Should I bring up the big kahuna? What about vacant land? And maybe it's going to be residential in the future. Our best answer is no. The GTO does not apply to vacant land. There's a little bit of evidence out there that FinCEN has maybe been a little ambiguous. If for some reason you think this vacant land really screams residential property, I guess conceivably could get on the phone with them. But generally speaking, it's unimproved or vacant. You're not looking at the GTO. I would start there.
What about questions about the buyer entity? Do you get many questions about that?
I haven't seen a lot of those. There was a lot of confusion about trusts until they clarified that. So again, trusts are not covered as other types of business entities. And I don't know if we mentioned, if you look at the whole GTO, there are other exemptions for publicly traded entities or a self-regulating body, which is a special entity that has authority from the government to make rules on its own. I don't know how often you're going to run into those. But other than that, I think people have got it. I mean, those of you who are on board here just wanting to get this down and concerned about it, most of the concerns seem to be right at the beginning. How do I set up the account? How do I send in these reports? I haven't personally seen a whole lot of confusion about the business entity part. Sometimes people have questions about, who is the beneficial owner? Because again, the question the government is asking is, you've got ABC Corp, buying this house in whatever county for cash, essentially, or cash equivalents. I've got to do a report. People ask, what the government's trying to get to is, who is behind that? What human being ultimately benefits from this entity? Because again, they're concerned about money laundering, potential illegal activity of some kind. The beneficial owner threshold is someone who owns or controls 25% or more And sometimes people get tangled up in, who owns how much, and is this, do I have to report? If nobody owns at least 25%, you don't have to report. And that sometimes is the case.
What about nonprofits?
Nonprofits came to us the other day, and scrambling around as best we can tell, it's not that they're exempt, but they don't have owners. So if it's a true nonprofit, there is no general exception in the GTO for a nonprofit. And sometimes people use that word loosely. If it's some other type of semi-charitable organization, that's different. If there is an owner, I would say, or owners, I would say that it would still be subject to reporting. But if it is a true nonprofit organization, they only have a board. They don't have equity interests assigned to anyone. So I don't see how you would report anything in that regard. And that's our best answer on that.
I just thought of a critical piece of information that you and I have both glossed over, and that is reminding people of the 8 new counties that were added.
Yep.
Hillsborough, Pasco, Pinellas, Manatee, Sarasota, Charlotte, or Collier. So clearly, FinCEN is picking up the West Coast of Florida in this most recent GTO. So you don't ever get a member that calls you and says, I've got a transaction that is covered and the buyer will not give me the information that I need. What do I do?
I have heard of that. I don't know if I have personally received that question, but that's certainly within the realm of possibility. I don't see how you can close. I mean, if you have determined, and we here at the fund are with underwriting and trying to help with real estate related information. We are not ourselves the government authorities, but to close that and not do the report because you didn't have the information would be breaking the law. And unlike there are certain places where you're reporting things to the IRS where someone won't give you their ID number or something, you can file an affidavit and say, I tried. That is not true as near as we can tell for the GTO. I don't think there's any way to report and say, hey, ABC Corp did this thing that should be reported, but they won't tell me who their beneficial owners are. I don't think that exists. So I think you have no options there. And I frankly don't see how you would close. And I think that's what our answer has been to people calling. I know people have called with that in the past. I haven't tackled that myself, but it makes sense that someone would say, and that might be exactly the people the government is trying to apply this to. It's people who would rather not give out that beneficial owner information.
Well,
so I think you had a problem there.
It's possible that because these things have been around for 7 years, that the word has gotten out for the people who are seeking to hide their money in cash residential transactions. The word has gotten out. So we might face that problem now again with the addition of these 8 counties, because it just might take some time for the word to trickle out to those folks that are interested in not disclosing who they are, even though they're paying $750,000 cash for a condo on the Gulf. That may come up again, but certainly your advice is spot on that you just can't close that transaction.
I think that's true. And I agree with your point. I think that, anyone who is sophisticated, who is really trying to engage in very sneaky illegal activities, there are ways, that fairly obvious ways they could avoid this whole thing, if they wanted to. So I don't know. I would agree with you. I would expect, a rush at the beginning, maybe of some confused people who didn't realize they would have to disclose this information. And, probably early on in the transaction, if you spot one of these, I would bring it up. There was a brief moment where FinCEN was going to make us not tell people they were reporting. They were being reported. That is not the case. You can tell them. You need their cooperation. So I would bring it up early and say, hey, I'm going to need that beneficial owner information because it looks like it's covered by this federal order.
So it sounds to me like our action plan that we would suggest to members would be that if you do business in any of these 8 counties, even if your office isn't located there in one of those counties, people's real estate transactions are not confined to the borders of the county in which they live, and people are doing more and more business for clients who are investing in different areas of the state. So if you think that you might handle a transaction in one of these counties, the proactive thing to do is to go online and watch the video that shows you how to set up the account. Get your account set up, and don't wait until you have a transaction in front of you where you're scrambling to learn both how to set up the account and get that confirmation and also file the currency transaction report. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was some discussion of that in the questions box as well. Yeah, I would, if you're in one of these counties and you're in transactional real estate, I would set up your account. You don't want to be, I mean, we're all, fairly sophisticated in the world of computers and internets and things like that now, as I call them internets. But, everything has snags. Melissa, you and I were just talking about, using the online platforms and giving yourself plenty of time for a webinar like this to make sure that everything's running smoothly technologically. So yeah, you definitely don't want to be sitting there at the closing table trying to figure out how to set up your BSA account.
We would encourage everybody on this call, when you leave here, if you have a few minutes this afternoon or tomorrow, go ahead and do that. Jay is obviously more skilled at multitasking than I, because he's also monitoring the questions. But Princey, what kinds of questions do we have that we can answer for members today?
So one of the main questions, a lot of the questions coming up are in relation to private lenders, hard money lenders, to see if there's a seller financing or buyer financing, if it needs to be reported. And so to them, the GTO does make clear that there has to be a bank loan or other similar form of external financing by a financial institution that actually has an obligation to maintain an anti-money laundering program and an obligation to report suspicious transactions. So those are the factors that you want to consider, and most hard money lenders actually don't. So that was a frequent question. Jay did answer some about maintaining an account. One of the questions came up is it possible to encourage clients to make the cash purchase in their own names and then quit claim it to the property of their LLC?
I don't know of any restriction on doing that. The GTO doesn't say anything about that. So yeah, if somebody, again, that kind of, if you think about, that's not even really frustrating the purpose of the law, because, I guess you're saying, yeah, if the person makes a cash transaction as an individual human being, is that being tracked? Yeah, maybe not. But there's no prohibition that I'm aware of anywhere in the GTO where someone couldn't do that. I mean, if you don't, and there are other instances, I think, in real estate law where you can do something and then do something else, and it's okay. But yeah, there's nothing in the GTO that says, there's no prohibition on later conveying, to a business entity or something like that. So
that raises a question in my mind. So Princey and Jay, is there a time frame, a deadline after the transaction that this filing has to take place?
30 days.
30 days. So you have 30 days after the closing to get your
report filed.
Your report filed. I keep forgetting the currency transaction report, the
That's CTR,
yeah. So you got 30 days. Well, that should be enough time. What other kinds of questions, Princey?
Can you download the currency transaction report in advance, or is it online where you can see the questions that they ask?
I think if you look at our video, you can see a representation of it. I don't recall off the top of my head whether they let you grab one off the website, but if you watch the setting up a BSA account webinar that a video that we've got, or the how to fill out a CTR report video walks you through the report. So you can see what it looks like, and what else is in that video is I'm calling off the top of my head, there are bits and pieces of the way you answer things in that might not be immediately intuitive to you. So I think it'd be helpful to you to watch the video to understand how you are supposed to answer some of those questions. But you certainly can get a look at the form that way. Watch the video and you can see the form.
Well, I will take on as an action item the three of us seeing if we can access a blank form in PDF format and post it on the fund website so that that is available to you all, because that is a good idea, so that you don't only have the option of watching the video and capturing some screenshots there. So we'll look into whether we can download the blank form. I'll bet there's a way to access that, but I'll leave that to my experts. But good question.
One other good thing is, would the title commitment show that a FinCEN reporting is necessary based on the transaction? And the title commitment, if we identify that there's no institutional lender and it's being purchased by one of the covered entities, for these counties, the title commitment will have a requirement to complete the FinCEN reporting and the CTR. So that will be on there for the New York counties, and it's already on there for the counties effective 11/21 to give a heads up to start collecting the information.
Well, kudos to our underwriting department and our branch operations for coming up with those standard commitment clauses. Good information. I was not even aware of that, Princey, so thanks for bringing that up.
We're lucky that Princey is on board today.
We are.
Collective effort, right?
That's right.
A question just came in about a sale of a vacant land for builder lots, and I think that's something you guys covered early in the beginning.
Bulk build for rent homes being sold by builders. Build for rent? I'm not sure if I'm familiar. Bulk build for
well, that is, they build the homes not for sale, but to rent out.
Well, it's residential, not whether it's
right.
You know, if it's residential property.
But the sale of the vacant lot is exempt.
Yeah, that's our best understanding. And, you know, if you have something you think is really hairy, or it's a lot of money and you think it's, you know, skating on one of these lines, you can call FinCEN and seek an answer from their attorneys. And this is lawyer stuff. I mean, we can give you all of our experience and knowledge that we've gathered over time. But if you're involved in, you know, some $50 million deal and you think it's skirting up to, you know, the definitions in the GTO, you know, do some research with them if you need to. But yeah, generally we're sticking with vacant or unimproved is not covered by the GTO.
Princey, is that it?
There's a lot more questions. We'll try to get to as much. One of the things that frequently comes up is, what if the buyer is organized in multiple layers of entities, like an LLC, that the member's an LLC and then it's an LLC. So I know that'll be something that's tricky. That was one of the questions that just came up. How do you go? How deep do you go? Do you just report the entity under the fee holder entity? That was the question just posed.
You've got to it's as to the buyer. I mean, this is kind of the thing that government's after, though. I mean, it's as to the buyer who ultimately owns 25% or more of that entity. And if the answer to that is it's XYZ company, I would look at the form, but I mean, that might be the answer.
We recommend going down the deep layered, going a layer by layer analysis to get to that 25% beneficial ownership. So you may have to go beyond just to get to that ultimate person who has that 25% beneficial ownership interest.
However far you have to go. Yeah.
Right. Because aren't they looking for an individual?
Exactly.
Yeah, they want the human beings who are ultimately benefit from this entity, because that would be the whole point if you were doing money laundering or, you know, depositing drug money or, you know, the stolen money from your homeland or whatever, would be to find out who's doing this. They want to know the person.
Well, I think that we are just about out of time here. So I want to do a couple of things. First, Princey and Jay and I will look over the questions that you've posted that remain unanswered and try to respond to you individually. And you can see that aspects of this, of complying with this law, are very easy, but then there are details. It's always the devil is in the details. And so there's some details that you might need to deal with in your particular transaction. So you're going to have to get familiar with what exactly is required by the GTO. And we will do everything that we can to help you and encourage you to ask questions and encourage you to, though, go ahead and get started. Get prepared for this and set up your account online. Any parting words, Jay or Princey, before I wrap it up?
No,
I want to thank everybody that attended this today. We hope it was helpful. If you think you need more information on this topic, just reach out to me or Jay or Princey, and we will see what we can put together for you. Thank you again for your support of the fund and of all of the resources that we provide to you every day, all day long. So have a great afternoon.